Hello, everyone. Part 2 of our blending video. So last time we went over add, subtract, multiply, and screen. If you haven't seen those, I'd recommend watching them. I'll link the video up in the corner. But now we're going to pick up on the rest of them. So those first couple were kind of opposites of each other, right? We have them in pairs. Add and subtract are a pair. Multiply and screen are a pair. In this case, what we're going to be doing is looking at two more pairs, max and max and min, and then looking at a bunch of blend modes. There's 3 of them that are mixes of all of those pairs. So back on our cool graph here, where we're using this stuff to visualize all the math of what's going on here. Here we are looking at our screen blend mode. Let's go right in and look at max and min. Let's get to it. These are probably my favorite blend modes, especially if you're working with height data. This is stuff that's really, really important. So here's max. Doesn't look like much. It's very, very cool though. So what this essentially is, right? Again, the green or the blue, my favorite color, I should know this. Teal is our original 0.5 middle gray, right? From the side, it's just totally flat, right? If we were to plug this in, we have our flat plane. And the green plus the teal is our new profile, right? If we look at the plane from the side, this is what we're looking at, this shape. So what the max is doing is really interesting. It's sort of like a gateway. And it's, looking at the foreground and the background inputs and saying, hey, whichever of you is brightest, I'll allow through. And if you have a darker value, I won't let you through. It's sort of a threshold, right? So you can see down here, the 2 inputs, right? Remember, green is our foreground, which is the gradient, right? Which goes from 0 to 1. And blue is our background, which is middle gray. So it's 0.5 the whole way. So down here, it's just comparing the 2 and it's saying, okay, hey, well, what's brighter, right? And it's saying, well, 0.5 is brighter. So 0.5 is going through. Here it's saying, okay, well, what's brighter? 0.5 is brighter. So 0.5 is coming through. And then here they're the same, right? So 0.5 is coming through because they're both the same value. But this is where it gets interesting, right? Over here, 0.75 is brighter than 0.5, so it gets taller. And then here, 1 is brighter than 0.5, so 1 comes through. So basically a way of thinking about it is you could erase the top 2 blue numbers and the bottom 2 green numbers, and that's our range. We have 0.5 all the way until the middle, and then we go from 0.5 to 1. And we could change where that threshold happens by just changing the value of our background color. So if our background color changed to 0.75, we would expect it to be flat all the way to 0.75 and then jump up, right? Because over here, 0.75 is brighter than 0.5, so it comes through. 0.75 is brighter than 0.5, so it comes through. 0.75 is greater than 0.25, so it comes through. Right, so as we move how dark or bright our background value is, we get a different threshold at which they change. Right? So again, it's just comparing the 2 and saying, hey, whichever is the brighter of you 2, come through, and the other one doesn't. Really sweet. You're going to use this all sorts of things. We're going to have some examples for this too. I just want to run through the blend modes first. Mid is his sort of dark twin, his evil cousin. This is the same thing, but in reverse. The darker of the 2 values come through, right? Really cool. So same thing. It's comparing these 2 values and it's saying, okay, well, what's darker here? Well, 0 is darker, so 0 will come through. Then here it's saying, okay, well, what's darker? Well, 0.25 is darker, so 0.25 will come through. Here, 0.5 and 0.5 are the same, so 0.5 will come through. And that's why we have this ramp from 0 to 0.5, because 0 comes through because it's darker than this. 0.25 comes through because it's darker than this. 0.5 comes through because they're both the same. But once we get to here, right, 0.5 is brighter than 0.75, right? So we start evening it out here because this is darker than this now, so we'll stay 0.5. This is darker than this now, so it stays 0.5. So we stay 0.5 all the way until the middle part, then we start going towards 0, right? Because these values are darker than the blue values. The green is darker than the blue. It's the exact same thing as max, but in reverse. You'll use this all sorts of places. It's really, really cool. So that's really all the pairs, right? We had add and subtract. We had screen and multiply. And min and max. You can kind of think of those as these 3 groupings that are very similar, right? So you have your blend mode you really have these pairs. We have pair 1, and it's add and subtract. Like this. They're the evil twins of each other. This is pair 2, and they are multiply, and you would say divide. Divide? No, screen. Don't use divide. Sound off in the comments if you use divide. I tend not to. People do occasionally have reasons for it where it makes sense. Computationally, multiplication is cheaper than division. Like if you can multiply by 0.5 instead of dividing by 2, you would do it. But division blend mode isn't really anyway, we'll do that in a different video. So the last pair is the ones we just looked at, max, which in Photoshop is called lighten, and min, which in Photoshop is called darken. And that's pair 3. The next blending modes we're worried about are combinations of those. Right, so the first one is, we'll just duplicate these. The first one we're going to talk about, everyone's favorite blending mode, if you're like a Photoshop person especially, is overlay. An overlay is a combination between multiply and screen. And it sort of just does what it says on the tin. It overlays your textures. You get like, whenever you think about blending, whenever someone I think in their head thinks about, well, I want some of like this and some of this. I want to blend these two together. In their head, they're usually imagining overlay, right? So we get kind of a blend between the two. It's less obvious in our gradients, but you can see in the result of our blend here, we can see some moisture noise. We can see some cloud too in the result. This is why you'll use this a ton. What this is doing two separate blending modes. What it's doing is saying, hey, if the value is brighter, it's going to be screened, and the value is darker, it's going to be multiplied. So it's a combination. So 0.5 will always be the same, right? If you have 0.5 gray, you are not going to, if the foreground is 0.5 gray, the result is just going to be the same. Nothing's going to happen. However, anywhere where you're above 0.5 gray, you're going to use a screen blending mode. And anywhere where you're below 0.5 gray, you're going to use a multiply blending mode. Where I like to use this, for the most part, although there's lots of other places, you'll see. If you have, and let's go this way. It was sort of earlier when we were making our noises here. I don't mind this if I'm just trying to overlay some detail onto this whole texture. Right, so instead of just doing the last video where we were either subtracting or adding here, or multiplying or screening, this is doing both. The dark areas will get pushed further down. The bright areas get pushed further up, right? So wherever there's a bright value here in the foreground, the pyramid here is going to grow up. And wherever there's a value that's below 0.5 in this foreground image, it's going to get pushed down. And where there's a value 0.5, nothing happens. So this is really good at just overlaying detail. I usually have it quite low intensity, because if I wanted something more intensity, I'd probably use a different blend mode. A really classic example of a place you can use this is, let's say you go back to our max blending mode here. A place that's really cool is when you're working with curvature. So if you have a normal map of this, we'll make this much stronger, and you have a curvature, what's really cool here is we're measuring here convexity and concavity, right? So on a curvature where there's no convexity or concavity, we get middle gray, 0.5. And where we get white, we have convexity, right, where the angle is like this. And if it's black, we have concavity, right, like a cavity map where the angle goes like this. But because we know this is middle gray, what we could do is, let's say we were coloring this and we made like a gold pyramid type of thing. we can just take our overlay, or sorry, our curvature, convert it into color so we can blend it. And we can just use an overlay blend mode, and you'll see what happens is really cool. The base color doesn't change at all, right? Because this is middle gray, which, remember, if overlay at 0.5 does nothing, right? So our background color doesn't change at all. However, where our foreground is brighter, it's going to screen it and make this brighter, right? We're going to get this edge highlight. And wherever we have a darker value in our curvature, it's going to multiply it and make our texture darker, right? So really cool. It's a great way of like non-destructively adding in that edge wear or whatever, because wherever we have bright values, we get brighter. Where we have dark values, we get darker. If we have middle gray, nothing changes, right? It's going to stay the same. If we had a curvature smooth, instead of just a curvature, which is just a broader curvature, it's a much more lower, got a lower tolerance for angle differences. Similar thing, right? This is a very cool look. It's just like dry brushing if you're like, I've been doing a lot of Warhammer lately with 10th edition. So here, anywhere we have middle gray, again, we're not going to affect the color at all, right? So towards the middle of these, we have middle gray, nothing's changing. But as we slowly get towards the edge, we slowly start getting brighter. So we're going to start making the color brighter. And then same thing here, we get these nice soft gradients everywhere, right? So you'll use overlay in color applications and in height maps, right? Like when we were doing the example down here where I'm just trying to break it up a little. That's pretty sweet. Overlay is really nice. You're going to use this a lot. Its evil twins here are add sub. So this is really cool. We'll put our colors back together, or our numbers. So add sub, you can think about it as like like people don't like to use this one, I think, because it can be like quite intense, but it's really just, again, the way to think about it really is just a much stronger version of overlay, because all it's doing, same thing, where over 0.5, we're going to be doing a different blend mode, and under 0.5, we're going to be doing a different blend mode. Except in this case, it's between add and subtract, as you might expect, given the name. So this is add sub. So if a value on your foreground is brighter than 0.5, it's going to get added. If a value is below 0.5, it's going to be subtracted. And really the result of that is you really increase contrast, right? Your whites will get a lot whiter. Your blacks will get a lot blacker. Middle gray stays the same, right? If we look at our cross section here, right, we have 0 all the way until 0.25, and then we really quickly go up to 1, and then we have 1 all the way to the end, right? If you draw a line here, down there, and then like this. So it's really intense. We can go above 1 and below 0 with this. It's a much stronger version of overlay. In fact, if we would have this at 0.5, it feels like overlay, right? But if we go higher, we can go much higher. We're just increasing contrast. I like using this one in the height map for the exact same reason as we referenced in the past video, right, on blend modes. If you haven't watched it yet, I would recommend watching it. It's the exact same thing down here when we were discussing on the last video, where if I had some sort of noise on this, the add sub is an offset. We'll use a moisture noise this time. The add sub is an offset where the overlay is a scale. And so let's turn these numbers off for a minute. So here we're doing overlay. Remember, brighter values in the foreground will make it brighter, we'll screen it, and darker values will multiply it. So we get all this cool edge damage. It's not very effective at the bottom where the values were already close to 0 on our pyramid, right, down here. And it's also not very effective at the top where our values were closer to 1 already, right? Because you can't really screen this more, right? Like you can see the effect of it is super weak up top. It's super weak at the bottom for the exact same things outlined in the last video. Same reason. If you want, you could add sub here. And again, instead of it being a multiplication based thing, it's more of an offset, right? We're getting the same level of push down and push up across the whole texture. I like to use add sub on lower intensity usually, just to try to, especially when I'm working with high frequency detail, where I want to just like have some things push up and some things push down. So a good example would be like a black and white noise, right? Like a black and white spots, where I want some of this stuff to push in and some of it to push out by the same amount everywhere. Like that. Right? Because again, if I did this on overlay instead, it's so weak at the bottom where it's already black and so weak at the top where it's already bright. So add sub can be a lot more of a strong tool for getting that look. I find you'll use add sub a lot, especially when doing height map blending, as I mentioned. So we'll revert these for a second. The last one we should look at is soft light. And soft light is a bit of an enigma. This is very much like a photo filter you would do in like a darkroom when you're doing photography. There's a lot of different ways of achieving this blend. I'm actually not sure of how substances work. There's a lot of different algorithms for this. You can think about this as the weaker brother of overlay in essence, right? You're mostly going to use this with color in my experience. Essentially, there's brighter values are getting brighter, darker values are getting darker. It almost feels like you have a min blending mode, a max blending mode on top and a min blending mode on bottom, but it's not exactly right. There's some other stuff going on there. Because if we look at the gradient result of the two inputs, we have this non-linear, it's not a line, right? We actually have this like ease in and out of middle gray. Like from here, this actually deaccelerates and this accelerates. Or sorry, they both deaccelerate, right? Away from 0.5. Where I use this mostly is when I'm just doing color blending for the most part. I'm sure you can think of other places for it, but I don't really deal with this with height maps very often. It's mostly when I'm trying to like blend different colors on top of each other. I really like the way soft light works. So we won't really talk about that in the context of the height map, but it is important. It's nice to have. I would play around with it a lot, just blending colors. So those are our combo blend modes, but we didn't really talk about min and max. So where min and max can be really useful, let's tune these down for a second. You're going to use these all the time, is when you want like specific types of edge damage or cuts, right? Because let's just go to this guy for a second. If you wanted like an edge crack on this guy, right? Like some sort of edge damage, or you wanted to like carve this like you would with like a trim dynamic in ZBrush. If you took a gradient and multiplied this, it doesn't actually work very well, right? We get this kind of lumpy, it doesn't look very good. It just looks melty, right? And it's especially weird here because we get this curvature, right? We get it, like the difference between this is shocking, right? Like here, the edges are nice and straight and solid, really flat top. And if we multiply this gradient on top, we get like this curved, this parabola here. And that's just because, again, if we multiply 0 by something that's close to 0, it'll move a little bit, move a bit less, move a bit less, move a bit less, move a bit less, and we get a curve, right? Because it's non-linear, right? Like we were describing in the previous video. Multiply doesn't affect every pixel in the texture at the same rate, right? It's going to be different depending what the value is. And if you're multiplying a low number by a low number, the result is low. But if you multiply a high number by that low number, the offset is relatively larger, right? If you want to carve away at this, you're wanting something like min. Like this is great, right? This is super cool. It does a lot of interesting like carving details where this stays nice and solid because it's just picking the brighter of the two values, right? Down here, all of these values are darker than this value, or brighter than this value, so they come out first, right? It'd be easier to see if I make this square a bit bigger, right? So way down here, this value is darker than this, so it comes through. But at a certain point, it's not anymore, and we start picking the gradient instead of the square, which does this really cool carving effect. You could do stuff like transform this right, and get it bigger because we don't want the tiling, to do these awesome carves. Works really, really well. And you can do it really even more specifically. Let's say you had a shape like a ridged bell or something, like this guy. Made him really thin. And you wouldn't want to transform this into place, but I'm just doing it for now because it makes sense. What a lot of people's instinct to do is to multiply this because they just want this cut. So like, yeah, I need multiply. And so they do this. And they maybe move this over here. And it looks horrible. You get this, it kind of looks like damn standard. Like you might want it in some cases. I'm going to make this a bit sharper. This doesn't look very good for the same reason, right? The multiply is not made equal everywhere. Where this does look really good, though, is on a min, like a darken, where we get this awesome carve out, right? This really sharp point. Because again, at some point along this gradient, eventually the cut becomes darker than the gradient itself of the ramp. And so it gets chosen first. So it's really good. Min is really good at doing these like very specific carveaways. And max is the exact same. If you wanted to do the same thing here where you're adding a thing, max is really good at doing an intersection. So you're going to do this all the time. In our video about height blends and working with the cobblestones, we did a lot of this as well, where we were using max to blend two height maps together. That's something you're going to do a ton of. So if you had, you know, a bunch of these little tiles, and we'll scale them up and have, you know, a decent amount. We'll have like 6 by 6 like this. And I'm going to quickly turn our scale down a bit on this just so it's a bit easier to see. You'll use max a lot to blend two completely different height maps together because we want an intersection of where they meet. So I can turn this down just so we have these like bathroom tiles or whatever. And if we have grout, so we have something like moisture noise, we would want to max these together like this, because the brighter of the values comes through, right? So the top of the tiles come through nice, but we get this kind of cool intersection, right? Like where they kind of snake up on top of each other because this is brighter on the moisture noise and over here. So more of it comes through, which is really nice. And we can put something like a histogram range. We're going to do a whole video on histograms. In the future, it will be up here. If you're watching this in like September, October 2023, it's up there. But if we tone the range of this down and we move it down, you'll see we get less grout, more brick. And as you make the whole texture brighter, we get less brick, more grout. So in my mind, this is where you'll use max the most often. We're just blending between two different height maps. Being able to just pick the brighter of the two values is really useful because you don't want to do this grout early on in your height map blending. You probably want to do it last. You'd probably want to do all the damage and all the interesting stuff you're interested with in the tile first. And then at the very end, you know, you're going to have two graphs almost. You're going to have all of your tile stuff, all of your grout stuff, and then just smack them together at the end with a max blending mode. So that's an overlay. That's an overlay. I'm in blend mode. That's an overview of how all those blend modes work at a base level. And hopefully enough examples to get you guys thinking about it. I hope that's helpful. These are sort of, you know, the core of how a lot of stuff in Substance Designer works, and it makes sense to understand how they work. Again, I don't want people, especially my students, just wasting time trying different blend modes. You know, it's good to experiment, but I don't think it makes sense to, once you've been, you know, you have a couple hundred hours in Substance Designer or something, to just be checking blend modes to see when you like the result. You should know how to anticipate the result and know exactly what you need. I want to go, I'm trying to do this thing, I need max. I'm trying to do this thing, I need subtract. I just want to know. I don't want to have to guess. So hopefully this video brings you guys closer to that ability where you're deciding it for yourself. If you like this video, please like the video. If you like the videos, please subscribe because you will get notifications for when the videos you like are released. I try to aim for about 1 or 2 a week. Just depends on schedule. I also have a Patreon now. If you'd like to support the channel and support me making more educational content for Substance Designer, you can hit the link in the description. I would really appreciate it. I appreciate you guys just watching the videos anyway, liking, sharing with your friends, subscribing is really helpful. If you feel like supporting me a little bit, the Patreon is really nice to just help support me making more stuff. So I really appreciate it. And we will see you guys next time.